The first part of developing this film was developing the script. This is something which I have previous experience with. However, for this project I want to look in more detail at the theory behind short film scripts. To do this, I looked at two common screenplay structures, the standardized short film structure and the punchline short film structure. I then built my script around a variation of the two. The punchline short film structure is a very simple film structure based around two simple elements, the setup and the punchline. It is most often used for comic effect, as I know, having used this structure for my short film The Pursuit. The structure is designed so that the majority of film sets up something and then it subverts it for comic effect. This is effective because the root of humour can often be found in the unexpected. This is something this short film structure takes full advantage of. The standardized short film structure is a far more complicated structure than the punchline structure and is a variation of the three-act structure, but is also simpler than the standard version and acts more of a skeleton of it, without all of the subplots and the complexities. It is based around 5 main parts: the setup, the inciting incident, the raising action, the climax, and the resolution. Initial conflict between Casey and Clone 42 shows a glimpse of the society which exists within the movie universe. Dialogue initially sets up the main character with reference to Gordon Anderson, setting up his impact that he will later have in the film. It also sets up the key theme of abuse of power, with Clone 42 abusing his power over Casey. The inciting incident in my film is Clone 48 taking out Clone 42's eye, which leads to him being imprisoned. This is the last part in the setup for the film, which then leads into the main body of the film. This section of the film makes up the majority of the main body of the film, which is the conflict between Gordon Anderson and Clone 58, while Clone 58 is being interrogated. In this section of the film, I increase the stakes, with Clone 58 originally not knowing what punishment he'll face for his crimes, and then realising the punishment he faces will be death. This increases the stakes of the film to the highest point and allows the film to move into the climax. In this section, I apply Blake Slider's primal theory, which is the idea that the most effective character goals and motivations are primal instincts, similar to ones that a caveman would feel. This is the point within the short film in which I brought in what I'd learned from the punchline short film structure, by subverting the convention, by having the climax act as the punchline, subverting what the audience expect to happen. The audience expect Clone 58 to face death, but instead Gordon Anderson is arrested for the abuse of power. This subverts the convention because although it works effectively as a climax within the structure, it also subverts what the punchline short film structure usually does, creating comic effect, but rather in this instance creating dramatic effect. This is something which, although it subverts the structure, allows the film to offer something unique. The resolution in this film is quite small and also ambiguous, as it leaves the impact on the system unclear. It also highlights the more personal victory of Clone 58 over Gordon Anderson. This is the centre of the personal story of the film, and highlights all of the themes which I was trying to portray. The main thing which I took from the short film, Russian Roulette, was the way that it created a feeling of loneliness and isolation. This was very simply created using just cinematography, cutting between tightly framed close-up angles of the main character and very loosely framed long shots with very little detail apart from the main character. This is a technique which I think I mastered and used effectively within my film to create a feeling of loneliness and isolation for Clone 58, and it's a technique which helped shape the direction of my film.
Well, there must be something wrong with your fancy bullshit sensors. It's because I'm not lying!
This shows how I've used this technique found a real media product to improve my film and create a feeling of loneliness. The first part of this shot is a mid-shot of Clone 58, and this shows him very isolated in the frame, with very little detail on anything else. This then cuts to a close-up of Clone 58. This is a far more claustrophobic shot, and reflects the small environment in which Clone 58 is situated. Furthermore, it shows how alone Clone 58 is, as he is the sole focus of the shot. This reflects techniques used in professional productions, and is also inspired by my analysis of Whiplash, which uses tightly framed close-up shots to reflect the intensity and personal nature of the film. What I took from my analysis of the ex-machina interrogation sequences was in a very subtle way that it portrayed the power balance. This is a technique which I wanted to use for my film. In order to do this, when Corden Anderson held the power, I used more close-ups on Clone 58 and higher angles. However, when the power shifted to Corden Anderson, I used lower angles and longer shots. I then did the opposite with Corden Anderson. When he held the power, I used longer shots. But when the power shifted, and Clone 58 held the power, I used closer, tightly framed shots. This is reflected when you look at the first and last shot of Corden Anderson, the first being a long shot, and the last being a tightly framed close-up. One technique which I took from the short film Sight was the way that it drove the story through complex characters and used little exposition to tell the story, which was quite enigmatic. This is a common technique and convention of sci-fi thrillers. This is something which I also came across in my analysis of the short film Eden. Something which I found in the short film Sight, and those sci-fi films often rely on, is a heavy use of visual effects and CGI. However, this is something which I don't have the tools or skills to use in my film. Furthermore, I think the use of this technique would take away from the drama of my film, which is a key aspect of it. I wanted my film to fit as many conventions as possible in terms of how it was produced, in order for it to seem as professional as possible, and also to ensure it can stand up on its own on the amateur circuit. I also used many other industry standard conventions. My film included production company titles, with the Maxwell production company logo, credits, a powerful epic soundtrack which was classical to score the film, and the colour palette of my film was also inspired by the conventions of real films, with my research informing me of how to colour correct the film to give it a cinematic look. This led to me correcting the blacks to very dark blue, and my whites to a very pale skin colour, and then adding a tint and increasing the brightness and the contrast. Overall, my film has mostly complied with all of the conventions in the genre, which I researched prior to making the film. However, at some points, particularly in terms of structure, I have manipulated or adapted these conventions for the benefit of my film, and in order to make it stand out in the crowded marketplace, and also so it can stand up to some of the other short films which I have researched.